Welcome everybody. Welcome in special Arik, Jella, Evan, Ido, and Theo was already here, I think, as well. Somewhere he's not in my screen, but welcome to the session as well. The session is about biometrics and facial recognition in cities. Hot topic everywhere around the world, I would say, at the moment. I mean, one city is even more enthusiastic than the other to come up with new rules and to forbid it, etc. So I think this is something that's relevant for every policy in every city in the world at this moment, basically, and everybody's looking for the right ways to make sure we can make use of technology, but not, actually grab the freedom of people. Before I'm going to say something about our speakers and the program, basically. I mean, for us, the session was about biometrics and facial recognition, and then you thought about, oh, this is facial recognition, basically, but I think it's a bit broader. I mean, when you talk about biometrics, it can also be fingerprints, iris data, DNA, voice, whatever. I mean, voice and sounds in cities are a big thing as well. We want to use these things to match somebody's identity example given, basically, but we could also do whitelisting or blacklisting if you want. In the GDPR in 2016, I mean, there's a lot of things being defined about biometric data, which is a good thing. But at the moment, it's not about theory anymore, but we're going to practice. And then you see that, I mean, the EU and some member authorities are arguing that the use of biometric data actually, well, is essential yes or no for national security and counter-terrorism. I think this is a big challenge for us to define, do we really need this and when do we need this? Because some countries, governments talk very easy about this. Some of them are a bit more complicated. I mean, there are at least 15 European countries that now are experimenting with remote biometric processing, largely facial recognition. There are quite a few court cases at the moment popping up, even to the European Court of Law, to the High Court of Law. But the UK police example given is a great example using facial recognition, but also French schools are an example, but also several places in the Netherlands that we experiment with facial recognition more or less in a way that it's a pilot without having everything in place, to be frank, to make this happen. And then the whole layer of AI comes over in the whole discussion about foreign companies taking our data, etc. So, I mean, we have a topic that's very relevant. So hopefully this program, which we're going to make as interactive as possible, especially the breakouts after the introductions. Another great thing about these sessions is that you can make breakouts easily without losing any time, because you can just click to another room. We're going to have a program with Evan, who is a member of the European Parliament, Ella, who's responsible for the policy and the campaigns on biometrics at EDRi, Arik, who's the founder of WebRoots Democracy, Ido, who works at the National Police in the Netherlands, and Theo, who's the CDO of the City of London. I would say we try to get this thing going with, let's say, 5 minutes introductions of all the speakers, basically, and maybe it would be an idea just to, well, let's kick off with even Insir. Did I pronounce your name right? I'm not sure. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not very good at it. But even, can you please give a quick 5-minute introduction on your view of this? With sound, please. No, you're silent, so we don't hear you. No. We do see you, so maybe you can move a bit, but no. So maybe you can see if you could get your sound working, because you're not muted. You're unmuted, but something wrong with your microphone, I think. Nope. No, yelling doesn't work as well. I'm know these things, but it doesn't matter. So I would suggest it would be maybe a rule in the sideline. You could help a bit on the technology in this perspective. But we can go to the next speaker. Maybe Ella Jakubowska. Could you say something from the perspective of EDRi on this?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess I've moved up the agenda slightly due to various technical issues. But a huge thank you for joining this session on what I think is a really vital topic for cities and for all their people. So I'm here representing EDRi, European Digital Rights, and we're an association of 44 digital human rights organisations based all across Europe. And for us at EDRi, biometric mass surveillance, such as facial recognition, is not a technology question, nor a question of innovation, as we sometimes hear framed. It's actually, for us, an existential question about the type of society that we want to live in, and whether we will take a stand to protect our public and our democratic spaces. We've already seen protesters being targeted for facial recognition in the US and Hong Kong, and we've witnessed people of colour in particular being wrongfully arrested as a result of this tech in the US. Around the world, we've watched really in horror as Clearview AI and PimEyes and Facebook and Amazon and many other companies have invaded our privacy by secretly tracking us and using our biometric characteristics such as our faces and how we walk and many other really intimate and personal characteristics against us, often in collaboration with law enforcement agencies. And then in the EU, we've had members of the European Parliament question the European Commission about the use of Clearview AI software by European law enforcement. And these questions have not been properly answered. And we've even seen a really scary resurgence of Victorian era face science and AI lie detectors, especially at EU borders, which have used vulnerable migrants as experimental test subjects. So because of EDRi has called on the European Commission to ban the use of biometric technologies in public spaces and for public purposes, because we consider that to be a form of unlawful mass surveillance. And we really just don't think that there is a place in our society for technologies which treat each of us as a potential suspect. Our faces and our bodies are constantly monitored, objectified, and even degraded into data points by an opaque, faraway system. It's such a massive threat to our privacy, our data, and really our fundamental right to dignity. And we also consider that the use of biometric surveillance like facial recognition in public just can't be necessary and proportionate, which are requirements under EU fundamental rights laws for the level of intrusion that they cause when we do have other effective means of enforcing the law. So that's just a summary of EDRi's position. And I think I'm going to pass over now to Eric, who's going to share some specific research into how facial recognition can disproportionately impact minoritized communities.
Sure.
Thank you, Ella.
Thanks, both. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, cool. So yeah, my name is Eric. I'm the founder of WebRoots Democracy, which is a think tank focused on progressive and inclusive technology policy in London. Recently, we published a report called Unmasking Facial Recognition, which explores the racial bias aspects of the police's use of live facial recognition technology. And this was a project that began about a year ago, just over a year ago, and was published maybe a few weeks after the death of George Floyd. So really, I think, timely report to look at this topic. And the focus of it, the reason behind undertaking it was that a lot of the conversation around racial bias and facial recognition was about technical aspects of how the technology actually works. So does it work as well on people of different ethnicities and different ethnic backgrounds? And as I'm sure all of us know, there's lots of research which shows that it doesn't work as well, which is an important factor. However, this isn't the only way that facial recognition can have a can create a challenge for people of color. And this report basically looks at the context of facial recognition, both historically in terms of surveillance and how it's used against different minority groups. So some of the earliest examples of surveillance, for example, is the lantern laws in the US, which required slaves to carry lanterns when they go out on loan at nighttime. And also a lot of biometrics was pioneered in slave ships built by the British Empire. And going towards the modern era, we've seen surveillance tools used disproportionately against Muslims and Black people in the UK. And the reason why it's tried to shift the conversation away from the neutrality of the technology is facial recognition is a tool similar to a taser, right? So tasers, they work just as well no matter what ethnic group you're from, but but they are used disproportionately against some groups compared with others. So in the UK, they're used 3 times as much on Black people than they are on white people. And then the report outlines a lot of different statistics about how Black and brown people are treated when it comes to surveillance, and tries to place facial recognition within that context. And some of the other findings we did, so we did a few workshops with people of color and Muslims. The reason I'm focusing on Muslims as well was considering a future knock-on impact of making our face such a core part of national security, which is that it could affect the rights of people to wear face veils, so affecting people's religious rights as well. And again, we also did a freedom of information request to the Metropolitan Police just to understand how they were assessing the equalities impact of this technology. And we found that the London's Met Police didn't actually undertake an equality impact assessment before trialling it across London in places like the Notting Hill Carnival, which is a huge Caribbean festival in London, and South Wales Police, an area which has the highest ethnic minority population in Wales, which also has been using it, took a very tick box exercise analysis of equality's impact. So the report kind of looks again at this sort of societal impact that Ella was talking about as well, and tries to situate facial recognition within that context. And the main recommendation within it is for a generational ban on the technology, which means that it should be banned for a generation until we overcome some of the more societal racial bias implications within policing more generally.
And Enrique, as a quick question related to it, do you think that one generation that we actually can solve these things, or is this just
so it's more like
stuff?
It's more like at least a generation. So the reason for that recommendation was in the UK anyway, there's a debate between 2 policies, which is 3 policies. One is just carry on deploying it. The second is a temporary moratorium, so like a couple of years to sort out regulation. And then the third is for an outright ban. And the thing behind a generational ban is to say that actually in the future, there may well be good cases for using facial recognition, but as things stand currently, it will be used in a disproportionate manner, which will have serious racial bias implications for people across the UK, and I imagine across Europe as well.
Cool. Can imagine this will be a nice material for the breakout to discuss a bit further on what the implications of this would be, basically, and how to do it across borders and everything, because this is something probably you should do global as well and not on a national level. Cool. Okay, more about this in the break. Maybe even in share. I'm from Sweden, from Brussels. How do you work nowadays? Oh, no. Still no sound. Oh. No. No, this is still not working. Sorry for that. I don't have it. Should be. Okay, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So we just keep on trying with our member of the European Parliament who's supposed to join, but sound is still not good. So we just tried another time. But we now first switch to Theo. Theo, I will unmute you because I did mute you because I could actually. Okay. Welcome, Theo, Chief Digital Officer of London. Basically, obviously, London is probably one of the most advanced cities in terms of number of cameras around in the city and etc. And this also means you need a decent policy on these things. So could you give in 5 minutes how you and your colleagues at the city look at the whole idea of biometrics and facial recognition in special?
Okay, let me try and share my screen here. I'll just speak to my slides so I can send them. It would be interesting
if you could say you could look at our screens as well. That would be more impressive, actually.
Yeah, can you see me? Yeah. So, the Metropolitan Police, under a government program, has been trialing live facial recognition technology that can help locate a person from a digital image. And the Met's using this technology to prevent and detect crime by helping officers find wanted criminals. The cameras are focused on an area, and when people pass through the area, their images are streamed directly through the system. The system contains a watch list, a list of offenders wanted by the police or courts, or those who pose a risk of harm to themselves or others. Now, the Metropolitan Police currently uses NEC's NeoFace live facial recognition technology. It measures the structure of the face, including distance between eyes, nose, mouth, and jaw, to create a facial template. The purposes are specifically to tackle serious violence, gun and knife crime, child sexual exploitation, and help protect the vulnerable. Where it finds a match, it sends an alert to officers on the scene. An officer then compares the camera image to the person they see and decides whether to speak to the person or not. The police have a policy to explain why they've stopped someone and also give them a leaflet that explains how they can contact them to ask further questions. The system only keeps images for a period of time, 31 days, or if an arrest is made, until an investigation or judicial process is included. The biometric data of those who don't cause an alert is automatically and immediately deleted. The system also records CCTV footage, and the Met Police keeps that footage for 31 days. Anyone can decide not to walk past the facial recognition system. It's not an offence or considered an obstruction to avoid it. The Metropolitan Police in London, and has been noted before by Eric and the speakers, completed a part of a number of trials using live facial recognition technology to find out if it was a useful policing tactic to deter and to prevent crime and bring wanted criminals to justice. In addition, the Mayor of London specifically set up an ethics panel to make recommendations on its use, and those recommendations were taken on board eventually by the police. It was tested in a range of environments and will now be used to aid policing operations where the Met have intelligence to support its use. Wherever the Met uses it, they'll do so openly. That means they'll tell people online where the Met is going to use live facial recognition technology before any deployment, publish the results of each deployment on the Met website, provide information in the form of leaflets to give to the public, place posters and signs in and around the area to make people aware the technology is used, and make officers available to talk to members of the public to explain what's happening. Now, during the trials, the Information Commissioner's Office, as a branch of UK government, looked into the issue and tested public opinion. And that was in January 2019. And 82% of those surveyed indicated that it was an acceptable thing for the police to use live facial recognition. 72% of those surveyed agreed or strongly agreed that LFRT should be used on a permanent basis in areas of high crime. 65% of those surveyed agreed or strongly agreed that it was a necessary security measure to prevent even low-level crime, and 60% surveyed agreed, or strongly agreed, that it was accessible to process the faces of everyone in a crowd, even if the purpose is to find a single person of interest. Now, that's the position as set out by the Metropolitan Police. I think there are obviously a number of important questions and issues that are raised. Firstly, there's one of transparency and openness. Transparency on how it's used, and openness on the workings of this technology. We also have to consider wider law enforcement methods. Live facial recognition technology has, of course, become quite emblematic and a sort of focal point of discussion. But of course, there are wider methods that trigger real discussions about actual or perceived bias, such as crime prediction software. There are questions about our existing CCTV network, in that when it comes around to being updated with an added tech offer, what is that tech offer? Because of course, the cameras that we installed 8 to 10 years ago will of course advanced with technology. So what's our discussion with the manufacturers, and what's our knowledge of what the market offers at the moment? We discussed facial recognition in relation to policing, and quite rightly, the deprivation of someone's liberty, either sort of on purpose or indeed by accident, is a major it's a major point of a rightful point of discussion. But what rules should be applied on private land used by the public, or private people, or businesses? The growth of CCTV cameras in the United Kingdom was not just in the public realm, or by transport or police authorities. It was also by businesses and people in their own homes. So what rules do we lay down there? And we're developing in London a Public London Charter, which also includes guidance to the operators of private land that the public see as a normal, almost like a public area, a place like King's Cross in London, for example, guidance on how that should be used. And finally, these are issues that I don't think cities alone need to deal with. We're very much of the view that national legislation is needed, but when it's drawn out, there need to be input from cities. And to that end, my final point is that at the moment, live facial recognition forms part of a wider discussion about how new and emerging technologies drop in our city. We feel it's necessary to structure and inform the dialogue for innovators, public servants, and the public on the city's stance on emerging technology. In particular, ways of working. We want to ensure that trialling and deploying new technologies is conducted openly and responsibly, actively engaging with public authorities and relevant bodies. We want to promote the best in design, ensuring that all Londoners are heard when new technologies are developed and deployed, to ensure digital inclusion, accessibility, and user voice is at the heart of future innovations. We want to ensure that best practice in data is held up in the management and security of that data, and privacy by design, to ensure that emerging technologies adhere to the spirit, not just the letter, of data protection laws, and meet relevant cybersecurity standards as well. So we see live facial recognition as obviously a distinct discussion, but also one that forms part of a much wider discussion about emerging technologies in our city as a whole, and therefore needs to be seen as part of that discussion too.
I think this is a proper introduction. Rick, when you listen to this, or Ella, I mean, does this mean we don't need a generation gap anymore because everything is in place, or?
Yeah, so yeah, thanks, Theo. It's a great introduction. Couple of issues I have. So first of all, again, bringing it back to the societal context, within which technologies are being deployed. In London, we generally accept that there are institutional problems of racism within the Metropolitan Police, which is demonstrated by the statistics on suspicion, stop and search, arrests in London, which disproportionately affect Black and brown people, but it's also replicated across the UK in every police force area. And once we accept that, that should, in my view, be a higher priority than introducing new technologies. You should seek to solve that issue before handing more powers and more intrusive technologies to a police who we accept as institutionally racist, because we know how that technology will be deployed. So that's kind of generally what my view is, more so than the aspects of the technology. And also, Thea mentioned the ethics panel. The ethics panel did their own public opinion polling as well, but they also cautioned against relying on it or using it to argue in favor of facial recognition, because when you're talking about a minority issue or issues affecting minority communities, you can't just rely on public opinion polling to justify it, because those two don't really align. So I do think there's still a bigger argument to have about what kind of technologies we want to deploy, what are the kind of effects on people's human rights and liberties and privacy. Not everyone wants this kind of surveillance. I'll give one example. In Birmingham a few years ago, there was an area that was inundated with CCTV cameras and linking it in efforts to combat Islamic terrorism, right? In the police's words, and the community basically fought back against it, campaigned against it, and then they removed all of these CCTV cameras. Can't remember what the name of the operation was, but if you Google Birmingham Muslim CCTV, right, and then there's kind of a tacit implication that people would just accept it. But I think there still needs to be a much wider argument, because facial recognition is very different to CCTV. Facial recognition is closer to fingerprinting, because it's measuring, as Thea said, distance between your eyes, length of your nose, shape of your face, even if that data is only held for 31 days. CCTV isn't really doing that. It's recording activities. It's not recording biometric information in the same way. So I still think there is a gap between where the actual debate has been. Again, on racial bias, it's been focused on the accuracy of the technology, and there's been very little discussion about the societal context within which that technology falls in. This is exacerbated by the fact the Met Police didn't even bother to do an equalities impact assessment before its trial, so it has no way of understanding what the implications of that technology is. So I would still like to see more time put in to discussing these issues and ironing them out before we see any kind of mass deployment of facial recognition. Unfortunately, in London, we've already got to that stage, but in the rest of the UK, there are varying stages.
There's no mass deployment of facial recognition operationally in London.
Yeah, good one. Sorry.
Yeah, but there's no mass deployment of.
I would add as well to what Eric has said. I think this societal level analysis is something that has been really significantly missing across Europe. Things like the chilling effect have been very well substantiated. We know that if people are being watched and tracked and analysed in public, they will self-censor, they will change their behaviour, and for the richness of our democracy, that's a very real threat. EDRi's perspective on the use of the sort of watch list that Theo has defined is that that's still not targeted, because every person is still having their sensitive biometrics scanned when they walk past, and saying that anyone can decide not to walk past a facial recognition system is, to me, quite akin to saying anyone can choose not to participate in democracy. Anyone can choose not to take up their freedom of expression. Yes, you can walk past this, but that's going to limit your involvement in public spaces, your feelings of belonging in public spaces, and your feeling of a right to be there. And if we take that in the context of what Eric is pointing out around policing being disproportionately targeted against minoritized communities, we can very easily infer that people of color and Muslim people are going to be the most disincentivized then from expressing themselves in public for fear of how they might be perceived by these systems. We've similarly had The French data protection authorities say that the use of these systems in public can make very normal things like putting your hood up, wearing sunglasses, or staring at your phone seem suspicious. And my last point, because I'm sure everyone else has lots of opinions on this to share, but again, I would, with Arik, caution about the use of these studies, because another study that was performed by the European Fundamental Rights Agency found that consistently across Europe, 80% of European people are against sharing their face data with authorities. So I definitely don't think that it's as clear-cut as we know that this is accepted. And I definitely don't think there's enough of a debate about how this can impact our democracy and our access to all our rights, not just ethics, not just the right to privacy, but fundamental rights, including free expression, non-discrimination, and many more that can be impacted by having biometric surveillance in our public spaces.
Well, maybe it's an, I mean, obviously a very clear point of view, basically, on this on this matter. Maybe not stressing to Theo, but to Ido, who works for the National Police in the Netherlands, and probably a few of these things passing your desk as well, I would say, in terms of criticism on the work you've been doing, or etc. So maybe we can go to your introduction. Maybe you could, well, address a few of these things that are mentioned by Arik and Ella as well in the Dutch perspective, basically.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting discussion that's already taking place, and I've already picked up some pointers. Theo, thank you for your explanation on the London situation. I would like to contact with you later on, if that's okay. And of course, I'm very interested in the position from Ella and Arik as well, because this is the issue that we are facing. It's not that we are facing, I think, a society in which facial recognition or other kinds of sensor technologies will magically disappear. I think we are facing as a society in which these kinds of sensing technologies are real and live. And the question that I ask myself when I discuss the role of the police or of the government in this is what exactly should our role be? And of course, in a dystopian view, the use of mass surveillance by the police or by the government is to suppress the people. And if you start from this point of view, then you have one kind of discussion. If you start by the purpose of the government, the purpose of the government is to ensure safety for its citizens and security of their goods. And this is another starting point to look at this discussion. For the Netherlands, I think it's nice. It's good to look at this discussion from different kinds of perspectives, because what we agree on is that we should know more about not only the technologies and the biases that are inherent in these technologies, but also on the effects in our society, the way they influence us, and the way we should or should not use them. For the Netherlands, at this moment, we only use facial recognition as a means like biometrics, but like fingerprintings. So what we do is we have one centralized point in which we match photos from people that are arrested or that are part of an investigation with prior photos in our database. This is mainly for identification, and is set up in an environment in which we test, we ensure the way we compare the images, that the investigators that are working on this are not the investigators that are working on the case. We have got safety rules in place. So we're doing this because we are very much aware that the present state of the technology is not good enough to give a clear answer on this person is the same as that person or not. So we have got procedures in place that help us do this correctly. And we use this kind of technology here to help us in our role as a police within our democratic government society to ensure safety of our people and their goods. Of course, it's tempting to try out other issues. Theo mentioned it earlier. Every citizen has got facial recognition available at this moment. It's on my phone. I haven't asked for facial recognition with Google and Microsoft and Apple. They give me facial recognition on my phone as a part of their normal service. And try to explain as a policeman to citizens that you cannot use facial recognition where every citizen has got it on his phone without any questions asked, without any without you wanting to have it on your phone. And sometimes it's strange because Google gives me a selection of family photos over the last 10 years, and sometimes the facial recognition sees people on the photo that are not a member of my family, but are identified on other information. So it's something that worries me, the way it goes in our society. And then back to the role as a police. I think as a police we should try to learn how these technologies work. We should gather experience. We should be very aware that the people who are working with this technology, if we are working, are well educated, know what the possibilities on bias are. So it's a seductive thought to use these kinds of technologies so we can use our surveillance technologies with people that are not so well educated. I think that's seductive because then it would become cheaper and more easily accessible. I think it's the other way around. If we use these kinds of technologies, we should have people that are well educated and know very well what the consequences of the use of these kinds of technologies are. That's a discussion that we had with Microsoft and IBM last week, in which we discussed with them the claim from some tech companies that they will no longer give access to their software for police agencies. And of course, this statement from a couple of tech companies is more nuanced than that. There's more to it. But what we see is that in cooperation with these companies, we should find the level of knowledge we need to comprehend what kind of technology we're dealing with. So we should have a discussion with them. And on the other side, we should have a discussion with, well, for instance, human rights groups on the other side. So at this moment, I think it's not a good thing, to wrap up my introduction, it's not a good thing to say government or police should not be involved in the use of facial recognition. I think it's in our society, it's on my phone, it's everywhere. But we should together find in which cases facial recognition technology is a part of our best practice, of our good practice, and what kind of knowledge we should have to use it correctly. I think that's...
You know, and to give a first question, basically, I mean, in practice, I mean, like Theo said, I think in London, I mean, in the Netherlands, it's not common to use facial recognition or fingerprints obviously are being used basically, but facial recognition is not very common, I think, yet in the Netherlands.
No.
What do you have any? What's the scale we're using this? Are there hundreds of cameras, tens, thousands, or experiments only, or?
Well, within the Netherlands society, of course, we have not so many government cameras. We've got a lot of private cameras, and the government has, well, a limited number of cameras. So we do not use many other many other kinds of surveillance technologies with these kinds of cameras. What we do have is automatic number plate recognition, and of course there's also a possibility for bias, but the technology is already much better. So yeah. So we don't have so many cameras, and we don't have a society that's used to this kind of use by the government.
Would it be nice though to put bigger fines on BMWs and Mercedes cars basically than other cars basically? Would be a nice application in that perspective.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Maybe Alan and Riek, maybe a quick response to this basically. So we have and then after that we go to the breakouts where we have I think Ella and Theo in a breakout, and Riek and Ido in a breakout, and my breakout is not gonna, I think there's still not a laptop being found in European Parliament, so I think we don't have the member of Parliament anymore joining us basically. Maybe Riek, Ella respond to the approach of Ido actually, says, well, we should look from an opportunity point of view basically to wrap it up.
From my point of view, oh, sorry, Riek, did you want to go first?
No, you go first.
Okay. So my point of view is that we shouldn't look at this as an opportunity. If we have opportunities for innovation, that's something that can come further down the road, because there are, of course, technologies that will be beneficial for government use. Nobody's denying that. But actually, according to the law, we need to start with fundamental rights. And one of the examples that Ido has shared around the fact that private companies are using and often abusing biometric data, the fact that it's everywhere is not a justification for the police using it. The ubiquity of a technology that actually has been in violation of the General Data Protection Regulation and the Law Enforcement Directive, which is the law enforcement counterpart in many cases, the fact that there are these violations just goes to show that just because something exists doesn't make it right. And we're seeing many examples of public authorities and law enforcement uses of facial recognition being struck down by data protection authorities and courts. So really, we need to be starting with the protection of people's fundamental rights. We talk about the security of people, and we're going to only have secure societies if people have their rights protected, not if we start to build up systems of mass data retention where everything from our car number plate to our faces to our expressions and suspicious style of walking can be combined together and used to stop us from protesting, for example. So really, if we're going to be implementing any sort of technology or other system that is going to infringe on our fundamental rights, which is absolutely the case for biometric surveillance because our biometric data is sensitive and protected, then the only time that can be justified is if it's demonstrably legitimate, lawful, proportionate, and necessary. That is what the law says, and the fact that it's useful or the fact that it's ubiquitous just does not meet those criteria. Arik, I think you wanted to share an intervention as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Ella just said. A couple of other points I'd add. Actually, just building on what Ella just said, there is obviously a line between security and privacy. You could design a system in the future, let's say, where you inject every individual with a tracking device, and that would increase security. You can make all of the same arguments around facial recognition. The second point is, I think most of the caution is really about where it's headed in 10, 20 years time, not necessarily where it is in 5 or 10 years time now. And in the report we published, it looks at the impacts of CCTV. I mentioned the face veil issue. I appreciate there's lots of different opinions on it, and there's lots of different reasons to oppose or support it. But it is the most visible, when freely worn, it's the most visible display of exercising privacy. And in European countries where they've banned the face veil and infringed upon people's religious rights, often it's done under the name of secularism, but the preceding debate has been all around security, and in particular around its undermining of the effectiveness of CCTV. So that's a direct example where the introduction of a new form of technology has 20 years down the line infringed upon people's rights. And in our report, we mentioned this as an issue, as a kind of as a minor issue compared to the rest of the report, but this is something that isn't even factored in the equality analysis by either the Metropolitan Police or South Wales Police. We haven't even really got to that level of debate. And so far it's been, in my opinion, quite too heavily focused on the technology itself and the accuracy of it, rather than thinking about where is it going to be headed in 20 years time, what are the worst case scenarios. And if there's a lesson from the last 10, 20 years of the growth of social media and other technologies, is that we should be thinking about these issues way earlier and not just rush ahead with deploying technologies and then try to sort out the issues later down the line.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah, this is a nice starting point for a discussion on what should be the design be, and take 10, 15 years basically to design this, basically, if you really want to do this, basically, like we took some time to create passports and everything as well, basically, and not only just give a piece of paper without thinking about it, who's doing the registration, etc.
Perhaps it's good to have a small reaction on.
Yeah, that's what I like. A reaction, and then we go to the breakouts.
Yeah, because I actually agree with what you're saying. What I hear you say is that there should be strict conditions when you need to use this technology. And you should talk about the strict conditions. So what you're not saying is that you shouldn't use this technology or the possibilities. That's not what you're saying. You're saying that you have strict conditions. To know this, to know these conditions and to know the bias, we should discuss it. We should talk about it. We should investigate what these technologies mean. And what my point was is not that it's sorry, Ella, your English, your grasp of the English language is much better than mine. But I think you mentioned ubiquitous all around us. That is not enough of a reason to use the technology. Exactly. But the fact that it is all around us means that whether you're focused on it or not, there will be developments happening around you. And if you, as a police or a government, do not know how to what it means or how to use it, you will also not be a party in discussion about that. And it's not only the police that will use this technology to to apply mass surveillance, it's also the police that has to stop others from misusing this kinds of technology. And again, then we have to know what it means. So the police has a wider role, and I think for this, the police has a obligation to learn about the use of this technology and the implications of it. That was my addition to your comment.
Thank you. I think great point as well. So and also something we could talk about a bit further in the breakouts we're organizing. The good thing about being digital is that we don't need time to go to another room. So I just posted a link in the chat on the right side of your screen. Okay, Roel was making even a better link, I think. Whatever. So breakout 1, breakout 2. Breakout 1 is together with Ella and Theo. Breakout 2 is with Rick and Ido. For the moment, we won't come back in a plenary session. So thank you for doing these introductions, basically. I think it's a great starting point for a discussion in the breakouts where we can make it as interactive as everybody wants. So I think well, depends on the number of people. I think we have about 20 people per breakout. So make it interactive and try to make it as sharp as possible in terms of discussion. So thank you all for the moment. And I would like to invite everybody to click on the event links so you will be out of this session and go to your breakout. Thank you.